Hi, thanks for joining us again. This is the Fantasy Ball Profits. This is our daily fantasy video. I think this is like the fourth one that we've done. We're going to give it a shot this year, see if there's an interest. We know there's a growing number of people out there doing daily fantasy videos. So if you like this, if you don't like it, if you like to see something different, please let us know. Now, at the end of the video, we're going to recap last week's results. We'll talk about how we did, some of our predictions, some of the games that we entered, just give you the results on that. But before we actually get into our information, Matt, you want to share a little bit about Thrive Fantasy?
Yeah, again, we've been talking about this for a couple weeks. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy site that is partnering with us. Check it out. They have a app. They also have a website that you can sign up on. There's a link down below in the description. Check it out. It's a new take on daily fantasy, unlike anything you've seen before. And if you sign up using the link down below, they will match your first $10 deposit. If you've logged in or if you've created accounts on other types of daily fantasy sites, you know how that works. So you get a $10 match. It's a great bonus starting out, and it's a great way to support this site. So that's Thrive Fantasy, but we want to get into the players here. So we're going to start off with quarterbacks here. So again, when we go through different players, different positions, we're not going to be giving you who's going to have the best performance, who's going to get you the most points. Most of what we're going to be talking about is value plays. I mean, even in quarterback, I'll give you a player or two who I think is a little priced a little bit higher, but is going to score a lot of points because I think they're a solid bet. But for the most part, we're going to be going through value picks. Also, when we talk about salaries, I'm not going to give you a dollar amount because many different platforms, different sites have different salary caps, and so that doesn't make sense. You know, $20 makes no sense to somebody that measures their salary caps in hundreds or thousands of dollars. So instead, we're just going to be using percentages because for the most part, they translate pretty well from platform to platform. So starting off with my quarterbacks that I think are a good value this week. First up on the list is Jameis Winston. Now, I think that he's 13%, by the way, 13% of your salary cap. I think that he's a little bit underpriced this week because they don't know what to make of him yet. They have a very small sample size. He came in, he had a bye last week, and before that he came in to relieve Fitzpatrick after just a terrible outing. He did all right. I think he had a interception or two, but they just have a small sample size. But this week, he's going up against a very porous Atlanta pass defense. We know he's a solid quarterback. It's just a question of how good will he be this week. And as far as bargains, I mean, he's, below him, you get into the category of like Rosen or Darnold, people that I'm just not comfortable starting. I think Jameis Winston has potential to explode this week. He's going to do at least decent. And again, he's pretty cheap as far as quarterbacks go. You can spend your money if you want this week on quarterbacks. I think it wouldn't be a bad week to do so. But if you're looking to save on quarterbacks, I think he'd be my number one on the list. Kind of in between, these guys are not as cheap as Winston, but two in between guys. I have Deshaun Watson. Again, he's kind of in between. He's about 16% of your salary. He's going up against the Bills this week. In weeks past, early on in the season, we'd say that, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't play this guy because there's a risk of this being a blowout. But we know that the Houston offense is not as high powered as some other teams that have blown out the Bills. We know that Bills are actually improving, and their quarterback is, well, he's serviceable, and I think it's going to be a somewhat competitive game, and so that blowout risk I think is diminished this week. I think Watson will continue to have make big plays, and what really counts is score you a lot of points in daily fantasy. So I think he's a pretty decent play. Another quarterback that I also see as being a threat on the ground like Watson, but also through there, that's Cam Newton. He's if you look at his numbers this year, he's been pretty moderately priced this week. He's going to cost 16 to 17% of your salary cap, but he's put up solid numbers. Even last week, he had 2 interceptions against the Giants, and he still almost had like 20 points. And a big reason behind that is that he's decent through the air. He's putting up decent numbers, touchdowns, yards, but you have that added bonus of him moving on the ground. 40 yards, 30 yards, 20 yards. I mean, however much it is, and that's an extra couple points. And it's just simple with quarterbacks like him. They always have added value because he can make plays with his feet. And so he's on there as well as I think a solid pick. And then the final on this list, actually, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, is Matt Ryan. He's more expensive, 19 to 20% of your value, but he's going up against Tampa Bay's defense. So what are your thoughts on Matt Ryan? It's a bit more of a pricier play, but if you want to go all in on a quarterback.
Yeah, I think Matt Ryan, Tampa Bay has the worst defense in NFL in terms of points allowed. That's going to be a high-scoring game. I think he's going to be great. You know, once it comes down to is will he produce enough to be worth his cost? Undoubtedly, he's going to produce. So he's a guy that I feel really good in this week. And I started that video. We said, you got to start this guy. In fact, you got to start a lot of players in that game. So I'm definitely for him. But I tell you the guy, are you done there?
Oh, yeah,
so I'll tell you the guy that I'm in on. And I'm not just in on him. I'm all in on this guy for all my scenarios, and that is Jameis Winston. Okay, only 13% of your cap there. He's playing Atlanta, who's lost some key defenders on defense. In the last 3 games, after those defenders have been out with injuries, they're allowing 40.3 points per game. They've been terrible. But I think it's not just this game. I love Jameis Winston moving forward in fantasy. In fact, at the beginning of the year, I kind of kept my eye on him. I passed picking up a quality quarterback with the idea that I'm going to get this guy. Jameis Winston is very talented. He was better in the preseason than Fitzpatrick. He was better last year than Fitzpatrick. He's a guy that I think has got great weapons around him. You look at Evans, Brait, Howard, who may be back this week, probably is not going to be, Jackson, Godwin. And Tampa Bay's defense is the worst in the NFL, which means that he's got to throw the ball all the time. And then to make it even better for him, they can't run the ball to save their life.
Yeah.
So they can't run the ball. He's got great weapons, and Tampa Bay's defense is brutal. It's a perfect storm for great fantasy numbers. I'm not saying they're going to win a lot of games. I'm not saying he's going to be an MVP. But as far as fantasy goes, I love this guy this week. All my scenarios are going to be with him.
You know, if I can add something on that, last week, every single one of my scenarios, I played Joe Flacco. Not because I'm a huge Joe Flacco fan, not because I thought he was going to be the top 5 even, in the top 5 in terms of daily fantasy points, but he was so cheap. And that's kind of Jameis Winston this week. You know, the basement as far as decent quarterback plays this week has been moved up a bit because Joe Flacco and company have moved up as well. But, you know, if I could go back and do it over again, I would probably play Joe Flacco in every scenario once again because he's so cheap. And you know, at the end of the day, I don't know if he even got us 10 points because I know he started him in quite a few scenarios as well, and he just underperformed mostly because he couldn't get in the end zone. He couldn't throw into the end zone. He put up quite a few yards though, and the same thing goes for Jameis Winston this week. I think I'll be playing him in a lot of scenarios because he's inexpensive, and I think he just represents a good value. And you know what? You might lose out. I think I lost a lot of scenarios last week because Joe Flacco underperformed, but again, I'd probably do it again.
Yeah, I was in the money. I'll get to that at the end. But I agree with you. When we talked about why you should go with Joe Flacco, we even said that it's not a great matchup per se, but he's just so cheap that you can reinvest elsewhere. With that kind of breakdown, when I look at it, my breakdown, was I right, was I wrong, or was it something more neutral in terms of my breakdown? I call the Joe Flacco thing neutral play. We never said he was going to be a great play. He was a quality play based on his salary. But I think that Jameis Winston not only is cheap, but I think he's a great play. I do. I think that right now, I think that's on fantasy rankings, a lot of sites. He's around number 6, and yet he's very cheap there. So I love this guy. But if you don't want to go with him, I'm going to go with him in all my scenarios. Now, last week I didn't go with Flacco and all. I did, I think, in about half. But I'm going with him in all my scenarios there. Another guy you could maybe look at is Eli Manning. He's going to cost you about 11 to 12% a year cap versus Philadelphia. Now, last week he was better. Went 326 yards and 2 TDs. Now, the thing that's confusing there, he's got great weapons around him. And Evan Ingram may be back, although it looks at this point he's not going to be. But he's a guy that's got good weapons. So he could have a decent game for you. CJ Beathard. He's kind of a sleeper pick, and I'll tell you why. He's only going to cost you 11% against your cap playing Green Bay. Now, we know Rodgers is going to put points on the board. That San Francisco defense is not very good. That's going to force Beathard to have to throw a lot. In the last 2 games that he's played there, he's averaged over 300 yards per game and 2 touchdowns. Now, he's going to throw an occasional pick. You can expect that, but you get what you pay for. Yeah. And then to add on top of it, he's actually got decent legs. He can run a bit. Now, some of you might be tempted to look at Sam Darnold out there, and he definitely is an option. He plays Indy. Indianapolis gives up the 9th most points to quarterbacks, and he's only 11% against your cap, and so that's cheap. And he had a nice game last week. Now, the one concern I have, you look at all of his games, only one time has he thrown over 200 yards. No. And so he's a guy that's cheap. He's got a good matchup, but I would probably invest elsewhere. For me, he's just a bit scary.
He's like the Mitch Trubisky of 2017, basically, thus far. I mean, you're not going to get a whole lot of fantasy value out of him at this point.
Yeah, although I know someone's going to roll with Mitch Trubisky after last week that he had, but I'm going to say that was a statistical anomaly based on matchup there. I'm not saying that Trubisky's not getting better and that offense is not making improvements, but I think that game was kind of an anomaly there. Then the last guy that you could probably consider out there is Case Keenum versus the Rams. He's going to cost you about 11 to 12% of your cap. The reason why I like Case Keenum this one, and he hasn't been that great, I think the Vikings did the right thing by signing Kirk Cousins. But he's going to have to throw a lot in that game. They're going to fall behind. That Rams offense is potent. They're going to get ahead. And Case Keenum's going to probably have to throw 40, 50 times. He might go 300 yards, 3 TDs, and 2 interceptions, something like that. But still, I think he's going to have a good volume in that game. So those are quarterbacks I think you need to consider.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to running backs. All right, so this week I have 3 running backs on my list, and let's see, 2 of them are pretty deep value picks. I'll start off with one that's not so much in that direction, and that's Tevin Coleman. This is a guy that you're probably only should consider playing if Devonta Freeman ends up not being active, or if we're going into game time and it looks like he's going to be pretty eliminated, or he's going to suit up and play very few snaps. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a tempting play. Even if Devonta Freeman is healthy, going up against Tampa Bay's defense. But think about how many different potential weapons that the Atlanta offense has. I mean, they have Jones, they have Ridley, they have Sanu, they have Hooper in the passing game, and then running back they have the rising Ito Smith, who he's not doing great, but he's stolen a couple touchdowns from Coleman and Freeman over the past couple weeks. And then you also have Devonta Freeman, who's kind of the lead back there. And so it's a tempting play, but if Devonta Freeman's not active, then I think absolutely roll with Tevin Coleman. He's going to cost you 9 to 10% of your salary cap.
Well, it looks at this point that Freeman is going to be out. He's doubtful, had another injury there, and so that's, as of today, he's looking doubtful for the game.
Yeah, and be flexible. Check these lineups Sunday morning. Check them at 10 minutes before kickoff. You never know what's going to happen. Then the other 2 kind of deeper value picks. First of all is Bilal Powell. And again, this is somebody that you're going to play again if Isaiah Crowell is out or significantly limited. And I think the latest is that he might be trending towards not playing, but keep up on it. I don't know. I haven't read it up to date over the last hour or 2. But he's going to cost about 7%. That's pretty inexpensive. This is a guy that you could plug in there at a very cheap price. I'm sure if Corral is out, you're going to see a lot of other people do the same thing. He probably won't have a huge game, but he's going to be very inexpensive. Then the final one on this list, and I think this is the 3rd week in a row that I've talked about him. Actually, every single one of our daily fantasy videos I've talked about them, and that's Lamar Miller. I'm becoming less and less, I guess you could say, bullish on Lamar Miller. He just hasn't really performed as well as many people have expected. Last week, of course, he didn't play. So obviously, I didn't play him in my scenarios. I hope you didn't. But he's about 7% of your salary this week. Actually, the same as Alfred Blue. It looks like he's going to play after sitting out last week. Again, he suited up but didn't play. But they're the same value. And I think that is telling you that Alfred Blue, we might be looking more and more at a running back by committee type of situation in Houston. But if not, I think it's still a good play. It's a bit risky. He hasn't put up huge numbers, but I think he still has a capability. And I don't think this is going to be a 50-50 split in terms of touches. I still think it's going to look more like 70-30 or 75-25. What are your thoughts on Lamar Miller this week?
Yeah, I think that, this is last week. Next week, Donta Foreman is due back, and I think when he does, he's going to get some carries. I can work him back in the offense. This is really the last week you consider him. But he's a cheap play. He's a volume play. He's rested up, and so he's a guy that definitely could roll with. I think he's got a safe floor, but not a very high ceiling. Yeah. That's the way I describe him. So.
And, if that game ends up being a blowout, I don't think it will. But if it does, then obviously Blue and Miller would both benefit from that. And on the off case that Miller has a setback, then I think Blue would be a pretty decent play, just like I think he ended up being last week. So who do you have at running back position?
Well, you mentioned earlier, I think the key to this game is being flexible and being willing to change your lineup. This is different than regular fantasy. You need to always check that lineup because on Friday there could be a key injury that all of a sudden now backup's going to start and yet he's only costing you $10 or 10% of your salary, whatever that might be, and so you can reinvest there and then take that money and shift it to other things. So you need to be flexible. You need to check up. You need to be willing to reinvest and change your roster really up to the last second. The guy that I like out there based on some injuries is Corey Clement. He's going to be 8% of your salary cap there. A lot of people are looking at Smallwood as the guy. I think Corey Clement is going to be the guy for a number of reasons. He's got great hands. He's actually bigger than Smallwood. He's going to get the goal line carries. And I think when it's all said and done, he's going to definitely out-touch Smallwood in light of Ajayi's injury there. So I'm rolling with him in all my scenarios. I love Corey Clement. For you guys that have him out there, I think you guys got a great steal down the stretch there. So that's the guy that I'm huge on. Another one that I'm big on just this week is Alfred Morris. He's going to cost you about 9% of your cap playing Green Bay. Bright is out. Of course, McKinnon's been out for a while. They don't know what else really to turn to there. They're going to be heavy on the run. I expect him to get 15, 20 carries in that game. And, he's got some value there. He's still got a little bit of a hop in his step. And then a huge one I think that I'm going to roll with in all my scenarios is Yeldon. He's going to cost you about 12 to 13% playing the Dallas Cowboys. Like I mentioned, I'm going to roll with him in all my scenarios. Now, Leonard Fournette's going to be out again. And if you look at sabermetrics and some analytics, they've actually broke down the Jaguars' offense. And what they found is that offense is actually more effective and productive with Yeldon in there because he got better hands. This is a guy that can run well, but he's also very effective in the pass game. So I love him in that game. Another one I love out there is James Conner. He's going to cost you about 12% of your salary. He plays Cincinnati. Cincinnati defense is in the bottom third in the NFL. Now, coaches last week said they got to get him involved early enough, and they did that. He had a huge game there. And as I'm rattling off all these kind of running back things, if there was a position that I think you can get some value playing, save money, I think it's running back. So that's what I'm going to do this week, and I'm going to invest in some other things like my wide receivers. I'm going to invest a little more money there. Another guy out there that gets really cheap is Sony Michel, 13% against the cap versus Kansas City. Kansas City gives up the second most points to running backs. This is a guy moving forward that's a legit running back 1 or 2 weekly based on matchup. I love this guy. Normally I stay away from New England running backs because they love to use different packages, different players. They love to get different touches. They really spread the targets and the carries out. But with ineffectiveness and some injuries that they've had there, I think this guy's legitimate running back 1 at this point moving forward. Another guy out there I like is Kareem Hunt. He's going to cost you 13 to 14% of your salary cap. He's playing New England. Now, it's not a long time ago that this guy was considered a running back 1 stud. He was considered in the top 5 or 6 of running backs. Last year, he finished top 5 in running back scoring in fantasy. So he started off slow, and everybody just kind of gave up on this guy, but he's starting to heat up now. I think what's happening is Pat Mahomes is really getting the attention of defenses, and running lanes are starting to open up there, and he's starting to put up good numbers. So this is a guy that is really got running back 1 talent, but he's going to cost you kind of at the running back 2/3 level. So that's a great deal.
And I would add, another piece of that is not just Mahomes, but the fact that they have Hill, they have Kelsey, they have other options on the offense. It's not unlike the Rams offense. They've been spreading the ball around a lot. And so maybe that's taken some value away from him, or maybe that's just why they've downgraded him in terms of how much you're going to pay for him. But like you said, I mean, you're getting running back 1 quality or talent for like running back 2 or 3, what you're paying in terms of salary.
Yeah, he's a great deal. And I think he's really starting to heat up. His yards per carry going up. He's looking like the Kareem Hunt of last year early in the season. Then my final guy out there is Joe Mixon. He's going to be about 13% of the cap hit. Now he's playing Pittsburgh, and that Pittsburgh defense is not very good. They're bad. They're near the bottom of the NFL in terms of scoring goes. With that said, they're actually somewhat tough against running backs. So he might not run the ball effectively, but the beautiful thing about Joe Mixon, he's got really good hands, which means he gets used quite a bit in the passing game.
All right, so let's move on to wide receivers here.
So we'll get to about our final 15 minutes of the video here.
Yeah, so for wide receivers this week, really, again, we're looking at value. I think there's a lot of great plays out there. Somebody like an A.J. Green, Julio Jones, going up against pretty weak pass defenses. We're talking about the value plays here. Who else on those teams are a good pick and going to benefit from those weak defenses? So first up on this list is Mohamed Sanu. Now he's at this point probably the third best receiver on Atlanta's offense. He's a solid guy. He's a veteran. He's been there for a very long time now. Like I said, he is behind the rising star Ridley and of course the all-star, all-pro Julio Jones. But last week I said if you're going to pick one of the two, pick Sanu. Does that rhyme? I don't know. But he actually ended up having a better week. I think he was the one that scored a touchdown. Ridley didn't have a bad week. But, I've been saying, as good as Ridley has been and as hot of a start he had in terms of fantasy, a lot of it was because of the touchdown value that he had. And if you remove that from the equation, don't get me wrong, it's important. But if you remove that from the equation, his targets, his yards, his receptions, pretty similar to Sanu. So, again, you're going to be looking at something like 9% of your salary. That's considerably cheaper than both Jones and Ridley. So again, if you're looking for value on that team, I think Sanu's the way to go. Not to say you should shy away from Ridley or Jones, but do with that what you will. Next up on the list, a very similar player in terms of their value, their cheaper player, I guess, each week is Tyler Boyd for Cincinnati. 10 to 11% of your salary. Again, I don't think he's going to have as good of a week as A.J. Green. But this guy, I think, has far, far more value than even Sanu. He's been getting a lot of targets. He took a slight step back last week, but a lot of targets, a lot of receptions, a lot of yards. And, I mean, again, 10 to 11% of your salary going up against a very weak Pittsburgh defense. Sure, start Green if you want to, but I think Boyd's a great play as well in terms of value. Next up on this list, again, similar story here, Deshaun Jackson. He's not the top receiver in Tampa Bay, but he's going to benefit from going up against a very weak pass defense, Atlanta's pass defense. He's going to be about 10% of your salary. Obviously, Evans would be the guy to have. He's the safe pick. He's a more expensive pick, though. Deshaun Jackson this year, though, actually, his first 4 games. Now, this could change with a new quarterback. He's not going to have Fitzpatrick that he had for the first 3.5 games. But, for the first 4 games, I think 3 of those games he went over 100 yards. He's really having a resurgence of his career. Is it going to continue? I don't know. But, again, 20% is very 10% of your salary. Very tempting play this week. And then the final one, again, this is going to be something that is dependent on injuries. Stay up to date on this. Is Washington receivers, really Washington players. They have a lot of injuries right now on their wide receiver roster right now. They have Richardson Jr., they have Crowder, they have Dotson, Brian Quick, and Michael Floyd. I think they picked him up recently. I don't think he's played a snap for them yet. And as of right now, Richardson Jr. and Crowder potentially could both not be playing next week. They're questionable, maybe trending towards doubtful. So what does that mean? Well, you got to look at other receivers out there. Is Dotson a viable pick? I don't know. But, keep an eye on it. He'd be very cheap. Another one, of course, would be their tight end, Jordan Reed. Also, I should add, Adrian Peterson dislocated his shoulder last week, and Chris Thompson has been dealing with some of his own health issues. So pay attention to it, but somebody like a Jordan Reed could be a great pick. And I know I'm moving into tight ends here, and he's going to be one of my top tight end picks, but really pay attention to this. And who knows, Dotson, or if, let's say, Crowder's out, play Richardson Jr. If Richardson Jr. is out, consider Crowder. So those are my wide receivers. Who do you have?
So, guy I want to look at, and I think it's a little bit risky here, but Christian Kirk, wide receiver of Arizona Cardinals, he's going to cost you 6% of your cap. Now, they're going to fall behind this game, I'm certain, against the Vikings playing in Minnesota. He's drawn comparisons to Odell Beckham last game. I think he had 3 catches, 80-some yards, and a touchdown. I think he's a cheap play that's going to get a lot of volume. Another guy out there I like is Chester Rogers. Going to cost you 6% against the cap. Sounds like Hilton's going to be out again. Doe's going to be out in this game. Somebody's got to catch the ball there. Now he's playing the Jets to give the 5th most points to wide receivers. Last 2 games with Hilton out, he had 11 targets and 8 catches in 2 games consecutively. So I like him. Another guy I like out there, Sammy Watkins. Going to be about 8%, playing New England in a game that's probably going to be very high scoring there. New England and Kansas City. If there's a game to watch this week, if you want to sit down and enjoy a game, that's the one to watch. Should be an exciting game there. Turned last week from an injury, had nice numbers, and like I said, I think that there's going to be a lot of passing yards in that game. Now this one's a little bit more scary, but look at Amari Cooper. He's going to be about 8 to 9% of your salary cap. He's dangerous, but he's also cheap. He's had 3 terrible games, but he's had 3 great games. And so he's a guy that could just go out and get you 2 catches for 25 yards, or he could go out for 10 catches, 125 yards, and 2 TDs. And so for me, I think he's risky but worth the chance. And then the final one is Adam Thielen. He's going to cost you about 14%. Here's why I'm talking about a guy. Typically, I don't spend that much unless I'm going to go way up there. He's number 1 wide receiver in football right now, hands down. Yardage-wise, all that. He's crushing it. 5 games over 100 yards. Cook might be out. They can't run the ball with Murray. This guy's really good, and yet they keep, for some reason, they won't put a price tag on him that puts him that level of like Brown and Hopkins, some of those other guys. So what he's doing, what he's producing, and where he's at and his cost, he's about that safest pick for the more expensive guys.
Yeah, I saw him there as well. Again, like 14% of your salary. That is cheap. He should be up there. You look, and we'll get later on to overvalued players, but you look at the overvalued or the top receivers this week, something like an Antonio Brown or Julio Jones. Sure, they have pretty decent matchups, but who's really been putting up the big numbers? I mean, it's been Thielen in terms of both touchdowns and yards. I think one of the only concern I had about him this week is the potential for a blowout. Is he going to put up 80 yards in the first half and maybe get a catch or 2 in the second because they just don't throw the ball? But, I don't know. But he could, again, like you said, I mean, he's been the solid pick week in and week out. So I agree, 14% is probably too cheap for him. So let's move on to tight ends here real quick. I think we just have a couple on our list. So I already talked about my first tight end pick, Jordan Reed. Again, pay attention to it, but if you have Crowder out or Richardson Jr. out, or certainly if both of them are out, if Thompson is out or Adrian Peterson, that's really shrinking the amount of targets, the amount of offensive weapons you have in Washington. So look to Jordan Reed, 10% of your salary. He's up there in terms of salary, but he's probably going to get the ball quite a bit. Remember, this is Alex Smith, who famously back with the Chiefs back in the day, was fine with not throwing to the wide receivers like almost at all. There's a season there where he went like almost the whole season without the wide receivers catching a single touchdown pass. He has no problem throwing to running backs and tight ends. And Jordan Reed, I think, is certainly a pick there. Now, if you're like me and you like saving money at tight end and not always spending money on more expensive picks, well, look at the other tight end in Washington, and that is Vernon Davis, the veteran. But he's got quite a bit of talent. If you look at the numbers he's put up this year, they aren't huge. Obviously, Jordan Reed's the number 1 tight end in Washington, but he has been getting the ball. He's getting the ball thrown his way, so he's not just a total question mark over him. He's going to get the ball some, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Washington running a lot of different packages out there with, like, 2 tight ends, just because, who else are they going to throw out there? They're going to throw Michael Floyd out there, new to the team as far as I know, or Brian Quick or something like that for 75% of the snaps if these other 2 guys are out. I mean, that would be pretty questionable to me. So maybe they're just going to throw the tight ends out there, and so I think Vernon Davis would be a pretty good value pick at tight end.
All right. Is that it, Tom?
Yeah, it's just tight ends.
A guy that I like out there in tight end is David Njoku, 6 to 7% of your cap. 3 weeks in a row, he has improved, and I think that's Baker Mayfield finally get quality quarterback play there. It's helping him quite a bit. Last game, he had, I think, 6 catches, 67 yards. But this is a guy going to last year's draft. A lot of experts said he had the most talent of any tight end, but he was a little bit of a project. Well, it seems to me that things are coming together. I love this guy. Another guy out there that's a really good deal is Eric Ebron. It's going to cost you about 8% against the cap. Now, Doyle is doubtful. Now, if you know anything about Andrew Luck, going into this year, he had targeted his tight ends percentage-wise more than any other quarterback in the NFL. He loves to use his tight ends there. And so with Doyle out, Ebron's been getting a lot of targets. Not he's getting a lot of targets, but he's actually had some really good games. Last game, he just blew up. He's a former first-round pick who's got the pedigree there. I like him. Then there's Cameron Brate. Now, this is dependent on Howard. Howard is probably going to miss the game. If Howard ends up playing, then obviously downgrade him, but I think Howard's going to be out. Cameron Brate shown he had 14 touchdowns in 2 years there. Winston loves to look his way. He's going to be about 7 to 8% of the cap against Atlanta in a game, like we mentioned before. It should be very high scoring. So those are some tight ends I think you need to consider.
Yeah, to add to what you're saying about David Njoku, he's another player that, whoever it is that's setting these prices just hasn't caught on to yet. I don't know what it is. I mean, is it the Chargers' high-powered defense? I don't think so. Is it that Baker Mayfield is just struggling as a rookie quarterback? Well, he hasn't all that much so far. So I don't know what the reason it is to keep him at 6 to 7% of your salary, but he's a bargain. And I think he's actually was going to be one of my starts, and he probably will start in some of my scenarios this week. So let's move on to defenses real quick here. All right, so I have 2 defenses this week. One's a little bit higher priced. Defense is another position where I like to save money, right? Now this week, if you look at the basement plays at defense, they're all pretty questionable. You have Kansas City, you have New England, and you have a couple other ones on there. And of them all, I would say my number 1 would probably be New England, playing on a big stage against the Chiefs, and something about it just, I don't see New England losing this game. As good as the Chiefs have been, as good as their offense especially has been, I think Tom Brady's going to pull this one out. And somehow I think that maybe we'll see a step back from the Chiefs offense. I could be totally wrong. But again, you're not taking a huge risk. They're the least expensive out there, along with a couple other teams. I think maybe they're the best pick, New England's defense. And then the little bit of a pricier one, that would be Carolina's defense, 7%. Still kind of in the middle of the pack. Now, the reason I picked them is, well, the same reason that we're talking about people like Jordan Reed or Vernon Davis or even Josh Dotson. It's because so many of their offensive weapons are out of commission potentially this week, or are going to be limited. And so if you go into this week, if you go into this weekend and you see that a lot of Washington players are going to be out, or they're going to be significantly limited, well, that's a pretty good game. I think it's going to be a good game for Carolina's defense because, I mean, who is Alex Smith going to throw to? I mean, who's going to run the ball for them at some point?
All right, so my defense, I'm not going to get into a lot of breakdown. I like a guy that's a defense that's really cheap. I'm not saying it's a great matchup, but it's cheap anyways, is New England playing Kansas City in New England, about 5%. Another one is Chargers versus the Bills there. Now, I'm not as big a Chargers fan as far as their defense goes with Joey Bosa out, but I think it's definitely worth it. So Baker Mayfield's looked pretty good, but he's still a rookie, and they're going to be about 5 to 6%.
Against the Browns.
Against the Browns, sorry.
He's got it in his notes. He just
against the Browns. So sorry, I've kind of rushed through this video here. We got some people that are coming up. We got Dallas versus the Jaguars. We talked about Blake Bortles last 2 years and how I just don't like this guy. He's inconsistent. You never know what's going to happen. He'll have a great week and then he'll just implode. Well, last week he reminded us why he can't be trusted. He just imploded. So, and Dallas's defense is underrated. And then the other one is Minnesota versus Arizona. It's going to cost you 7 to 8%. I'm actually surprised. For me, that's probably one of the very top defensive lineups, and why they have it ranked so low price-wise, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
And so once again, playing in Minnesota, that defense seemed to right the ship last week. So those are the ones. New England, Kansas City's cheap. Chargers, Browns, Dallas, Jags, and then Minnesota and Arizona. So those are the defenses I'm looking at.
All right. So real quick, give me a player that you see as overvalued this week. Somebody that you should not roll with because they're overpriced.
Yeah, the guy for me is David Johnson versus Minnesota. He's going to get a lot of volume there, obviously, but that offense is a mess, obviously, right now. They're scoring like 13 points per game is what they're averaging per season, playing Minnesota on a defense that's getting better. And last year, Minnesota was the #1 defense in the NFL. There's going to be crowd noise, a lot of issues there. They're going to stack the box. That could be a long day for David Johnson.
So for this week, again, we're looking at relative value. These two players, I think, will both have a pretty good week, fantasy week. But they're also the two most expensive at the position. First of all, Patrick Mahomes, quarterback, something like 20% of your salary. He's the ceiling as far as your salary at quarterback this week. Going up against New England, he has the potential to have, a 300-yard, 3-touchdown game, maybe. It could be even higher than that. But I don't know. I think he's a little bit overpriced. I would consider him maybe more if he was like at 17% of your salary or something like that this week. I know some of you guys are going to disagree with that because look at his stats this year. But I think he's due to take a step back, and I think the most expensive quarterback this week. I don't know. Looking at the matchups, I would put somebody else up there, like maybe like Matt Ryan or Phillip Rivers or something like that. Somebody that has maybe a little bit better of a matchup. And then at wide receiver, Antonio Brown. Again, I think he's going to have a great week. He's got a pretty decent matchup. But I don't think it justifies his value all the way up there. And I think there's a lot of players underneath him in terms of salary that will do just as well. I mean, Adam Thielen is a great example, a full 5% cheaper than Antonio Brown, and yet they very well could be even in terms of their yards and in terms of their touchdowns this week. So those are my two picks for overvalued players. Real quick, before we round this video up, do you have your lineup ready this week? I don't know if you do or not.
I don't have my lineup ready. I was going to do a recap of last week's. That's all. So you want me to do the recap now?
Absolutely.
So here's my recap looking forward. Last week I talked about 33 players. I went and looked back, and about 23 I nailed, I believe. 5 were off. We're all in about. And then the other 5 were what I would call neutral plays. They weren't bad or good. We were somewhere in the middle. And so that's like an 82% success rate. Like in the 3 weeks, last week I invested about $7 into, I think it was like 4 or 5 scenarios out there. I won 10. First week I did this, I invested 8, won 29. Second week I invested 12, won 0. Last week I invested 7, won 10. So that's $27 invested, won $39. That's not a lot of money, but I don't do this for the money. I do it just to run the scenarios and to play the numbers a little bit and just see how they play out. So I'm still in the black. So I'm doing all right there. Last week, the plays that I have, and here's some of the guys we talked about. We talked about quarterbacks. I talked about Joe Flacco, Derek Carr, Blake Bortles, and Ryan Tannehill. On Flacco, we went on to say that he's a guy that's cheap, and basically we're playing him ultimately not because he got a great matchup, because his cost. Not too great on the quarterback plays there. That's one where I think it was good to spend some money. As far as running backs, so we talked about Kerryon Johnson, Sony Michel, Yeldon, Hunt, David Johnson, Connor, Christian McCaffrey, and Mike Davis. We said if Carson is out, and those we pretty much nailed all those there. I also talked about last week. I said I wasn't very comfortable and I was going to spend more money at wide receivers, and that made sense. I look back at last week, and 4 of the top 5 scores, or I should say 5 of the top 6 scores for wide receivers were Brown, Thielen, Hopkins, Adams, and Beckham. Just reinforcing the idea last week that I think your value is to spend money on your wide receivers. They ended up right up there. Talked about Marquise Valdes-Scantling, how cheap he was, but we said that you have to watch the injury report, and sure enough, a lot of guys were out there, and he actually had a decent game volume-wise. Tywan Taylor was kind of a miss. Calvin Ridley wasn't great. He wasn't bad. Juju Smith-Schuster did okay. Julian Edelman did well. I talked about him. Gordon, Davis, and Geronimo Allison, we said if he plays. As far as tight ends go, I talked about Gates, Croft, Swaim, Njoku, Watson. I think we nailed some defensive picks there. New England versus Indy, Saints versus the Redskins, Ravens, Browns, and Kansas City and the Jags as a defense we said you should roll with. And if you did pretty well there. And then we also mentioned, or at least I mentioned, that Pat Mahomes was overpriced. I think he was. He threw 2 interceptions, didn't throw a touchdown pass. Now, he did redeem his day. He had a rushing touchdown and 300 yards, but overall it wasn't great. We were off about Andrew Luck. He had some guys that were out. We said you might want to stay away from him. He still had a good game there. Fool's gold, we said Dak Prescott and Lamar Miller is what I called fool's gold. Kind of nailed that. So kind of recap of what we did last week, at least what I did. Anything you want to talk about there?
Yeah, I did want to talk about my scenario last week. Now, I don't have the whole lineup for you because I ended up not rolling with that lineup that I said I was going to, mostly because of injuries, because I had Miller in the lineup. And I'll actually tell you what I did going into Sunday. So basically, you had 2 different injury reports I was watching. You had Lamar Miller and Dalvin Cook. Now, the problem there was that Dalvin Cook was playing at, I think, the 3 o'clock game, so the afternoon slot. Lamar Miller was playing at night. Okay, so there's a bit of a problem here. I saw that Dalvin Cook was probably going to be out. So what I did is I put Latavius Murray in there. And if Dalvin Cook ended up being active, then I would have shifted it to somebody like Alfred Blue in the case that Miller would have been out. Now, if Miller and Cook had both played, I would have been out of luck. But that's a bit of a gamble I was willing to take. I ended up rolling with, I think, Murray. So this was my lineup last week. Joe Flacco, as I said earlier, TJ Yeldon, Murray, Adams, Tate, Thielen, Graham, Elliott, and the Giants defense. That was not my top lineup, but that's the one that I talked about in the video. It ended up scoring me 120.82 points, top 37%, not great. I mean, it's top 50%, but again, not my top lineup. I was not in the money, I don't think, for that lineup. And then for this week, I did want to talk about my lineup that I think is going to be my top lineup this week. First of all, at quarterback, as we talked about, Jameis Winston, I think a great value. At running back, Joe Mixon. I didn't talk about him. You talked about him. I think he's a great value this week up against weak Pittsburgh defense. Lamar Miller, again, I'm rolling with him again. He's cheap. It's a bit of a gamble, but I'm going with him. At wide receiver, my safe pick is Mike Evans against Atlanta's defense. Then I have Mohamed Sanu, a bit of a value pick against Tampa Bay's defense. Tyler Boyd, I think he's going to continue to get a lot of targets, a lot of receptions up against Pittsburgh's defense. And you can see a lot of our picks week in, week out oftentimes are lineup based. At tight end, I have Reed, and then my flex pick is AJ Green. Again, they're going up against a weak Pittsburgh defense. Apparently, I think Cincinnati's just going to have a huge offensive week this week. And then my defense is the Patriots. Again, just trying to save money where I can save money. So we'll update you on that next week on how we all did in our scenarios. And you have anything else to add?
No, I think that's it. I guess thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing your comments, questions, whatever you might have. God bless and take care.
Yeah, have a great, or I should say, good luck this weekend.